The night my cousin burst into my quarters, the sound was like an explosion. The door slammed against the wall, and before I could even rise from the bed, his fists were already flying. The taste of blood filled my mouth after the first strike, sharp and metallic, and my ribs screamed as if they cracked under the weight of his anger. I stumbled backward, trying to catch my balance, but he didn't stop. He wanted to break me, piece by piece, until I could no longer stand. In the blur of pain and shouting, I saw something that cut deeper than his fists. My father stood in the doorway. His arms folded, his face cold, his eyes steady. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't moving. He was watching. And that silence hurt worse than every bone that cracked that night. People always told me the uniform meant respect. That if I wore it with pride and discipline, the world would finally see me as worthy. But I learned the truth in that moment. The uniform wasn't enough. The service, the sweat, the scars, it didn't matter. They could erase it all with one rumor, one lie whispered behind my back. They called me unstable. They said I exaggerated. They destroyed my medals, burned my mother's letters, handed my commendations to someone who didn't earn them. And when I tried to stand tall, they said I was betraying the family. I thought silence kept peace. I thought obedience earned love. I was wrong. Silence only gave them room to rewrite my story. I want you to think about something. What would you do if the very person who was meant to protect you, the man whose approval you spent your whole life chasing, let someone else destroy you? Not strangers, not enemies on a battlefield, but blood, family, the ones who should have been your shield. Would you fight back? Or would you break under the weight of their lies? That night, as I lay on the floor with my cousin's rage still burning on my skin, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just fighting him. I was fighting years of being erased, of being told I wasn't enough, of being invisible in the very house that raised me. This isn't just about fists and bruises. This is about truth. The truth they tried to bury with fake reports and stolen recognition. The truth they twisted to make themselves look honorable while I was painted as weak. They thought their silence would be louder than my voice. But silence has a cost. It eats away at you until there's nothing left but the ache of being unseen. I carried that ache for years. And when the night came that my cousin's rage and my father's silence collided, I realized I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You see, pain leaves marks on the body, but betrayal, it carves itself into your soul. And betrayal doesn't come louder than when your own father chooses to watch you bleed rather than lift a hand to help. That was my moment of awakening. The night when blood spilled, when bones cracked, when I finally saw the truth for what it was. They didn't want me respected. They wanted me erased. But I survived. And because I survived, I can finally speak. What I'm going to tell you isn't easy. It isn't polished. It isn't the version they want written in official reports or whispered in family gatherings. It's raw. It's ugly. It's what silence really costs. And by the time I finish, you'll understand why some truths are too heavy to hide forever. When I was a child, before uniforms and medals and ceremonies, I learned what favoritism felt like. It was never hidden. It was right there in the open, plain enough for even a 10-year-old to notice. I remember bringing home a small ribbon from school, first place in a track competition. I was sweating, still buzzing from the race, proud of how hard I had run. I placed it on the kitchen table, waiting for my father to look up from his newspaper. He glanced once, barely lifting his eyes, and muttered, "Cute." That was it. A single word, flat and dismissive. That same week, my cousin Cyrus showed up with a second-place trophy from some local event. The house lit up like he had carried home Olympic gold. My father stood, clapped him on the back, and told everyone within earshot that Cyrus had Creed blood, strong and steady. I stood in the corner, holding my little ribbon in my hand, feeling it lose all its shine. It kept happening. Every small victory I had was treated like a hobby, something girls did to pass time. Every stumble or mistake was magnified. If I dropped a glass in the kitchen, my father shook his head and muttered, "You're clumsy, just like your mother." But when Cyrus messed up, when he dented the car door backing out of the driveway or lost his place in a drill team performance, my father would laugh. "Boys make mistakes," he'd say, "but they learn fast." He never used that kind of patience with me. I only got comparisons, the kind that cut deeper than any punishment. Cyrus was destined for greatness. I was destined to be a reminder of weakness. There was one Saturday I can't forget. I had spent hours working on a model airplane, carefully gluing the wings, adjusting the propeller until it was as straight as I could make it. I walked into the living room with a smile, holding it out for my father to see. He looked up, frowned, and pointed at a small bend in the rudder. "That's not right," he said. "Cyrus, come here. Show her how it's supposed to be done." I stood frozen as my cousin smirked, took the plane from my hands, and earned a nod of approval just for standing there. The toy wasn't the loss. It was the way my father's eyes shifted from me to him, like passing a torch. From that day on, I stopped bringing my victories to the table. Family gatherings weren't any easier. At barbecues, Cyrus would show up in polished ROTC gear, standing tall like he had been born for the uniform. My father beamed with pride, introducing him as the future of the Creed name. I was there too, in uniform as well, but no one noticed. Once, I overheard someone mutter, "Not bad for a girl," when I reached for a soda. I never turned to see who said it. It didn't matter. What mattered was how my father laughed with Cyrus and said, "This one's going to make the family proud." He didn't say it about me. He never did. The favoritism wasn't just about words. It showed in actions. When I trained harder, ran faster, or studied longer, I got silence. When Cyrus slacked or even failed, he got excuses. My father shielded him from consequences, smoothing over mistakes like they were nothing. I saw early how the rules bent for him and tightened for me. If Cyrus broke something, it was shrugged off. If I broke something, it was shame. The message was clear: Cyrus could stumble his way to glory, but I would never be allowed to earn it no matter how much I bled for it. These moments were small on the surface, but they planted a wound that grew with me. I wanted so badly for my father to see me, to believe in me the way he believed in Cyrus. Every medal, every certificate, every achievement I earned, I carried them like offerings, hoping one day he would look at me with the same pride. But deep down, I think I already knew. No matter what I did, I wasn't the one he wanted. I wasn't the real Creed in his eyes. Cyrus was. And that favoritism, that imbalance, was the first shadow of the betrayal that would later nearly destroy me. When I finally joined the army, I thought it would be the place where everything changed. I told myself that if I wore the uniform, if I pushed through the pain and showed what I was capable of, then my father would have no choice but to respect me. Training was brutal, but I gave it everything. Long runs in the heat until my lungs felt like fire, drills that left blisters on my hands, nights where sleep was nothing more than an hour stolen before the next call. I stitched up wounds in the field, carried packs that felt heavier than my own body, and learned to stay steady even when exhaustion screamed through my bones. Each day, I thought I was proving something. Each day, I thought I was moving closer to finally being seen. Cyrus joined too, of course. To him, the army was another stage to perform on. He knew how to stand tall at inspections, how to polish boots until they shined, how to say the right words at the right times. He looked the part, but when it came to real work, the kind that demanded grit and sacrifice, he always found ways to slip aside. He could disappear when it was hard and reappear when the cameras came out. I didn't envy him. I worked harder because I believed the army would reward effort, not show. That belief lasted until the day of the field exercise. A crack of gunfire sent Cyrus diving for cover, leaving half his unit exposed. 2 recruits froze in panic, one fell and injured himself badly. I wasn't even assigned to that unit, but I saw it happen. I ran in, pulled the team together, and started triage in the dust with nothing but the supplies I had on me. I stabilized the injured, called for medevac, and secured the perimeter so the rest of the soldiers could regroup. My report was written carefully afterward, every detail logged, every step recorded. Not because I wanted credit, but because I believed the record mattered. The next day, I was called into the commander's tent. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced, and told me, "You don't need to name names. We don't want to ruin anyone's career over one mistake. Family reputation, you know." I sat there stunned. I knew what he meant. I was being told to erase Cyrus's failure. My father's influence was in the air, heavy and unspoken. When the official report came out, my words had been cut down to a few vague lines. Exemplary response under pressure. That was it. My actions erased, the details gone. And Cyrus? He didn't face discipline. He got reassigned quietly, and later returned with a story polished to sound like leadership under stress. People clapped him on the back for surviving a challenge that nearly cost others their lives. The betrayal cut deep. Not just because my work was stolen, but because I realized my father's hand was in it. He had signed off on the falsified paperwork. His name was there, printed clear. It wasn't enough for him to ignore me, he was helping rewrite the story, so I disappeared entirely. Everything I had endured, every bruise and scar, all of it could be swept aside with a stroke of his pen. I remember staring at that report, my name shrunk down to a single line, and thinking this was the moment the truth became clear. The army wasn't going to protect me from my family's shadow. My cousin's failures would be hidden, my efforts buried, and my father would always make sure his version of the story came first. I had gone to the army to earn respect, but what I found was the same wound, only bigger. It didn't matter how hard I worked. In their eyes, Cyrus was the real soldier. I was just the placeholder. The hall smelled of brass polish and polished wood, the kind of scent that clings to your uniform and reminds you of every ceremony you've ever stood through. My hands were damp against the paper I held, notes I had practiced for weeks. I wasn't planning anything dramatic, just a simple thank you to my team, a moment to show I was proud and steady. When they called my name, the applause filled the room, bouncing off the walls until it felt bigger than me. My chest tightened with a mix of pride and nerves. I walked toward the stage, each step sharp against the floor, each breath reminding me this was my moment. I stood there, uniform pressed, ribbons lined across my chest like proof I had earned my place. The microphone waited in front of me, and I opened my mouth to speak. That's when I saw him. My father. He rose from his seat, slow and deliberate, and the room shifted toward him as if it had been waiting. His voice carried the same way it always had in my childhood, commanding, heavy, a voice people listened to without question. "We should remember the sacrifices of men like Cyrus Thorne," he declared, his hand gesturing toward my cousin sitting smugly in the front row. The applause rose again, louder this time. People clapped and nodded as if the truth had just been spoken. My fingers tightened around my notes, trembling. He hadn't just interrupted me, he had erased me. The stage, the microphone, the applause, it all slipped away. I was no longer the one being honored. I was just a placeholder, standing there until the real soldier could be praised. My father never even looked at me. Not once. His eyes went to Cyrus, as if I had never existed. I forced a thin smile, nodded, and stepped back. Outwardly, I looked calm, but inside my chest felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out. The sting was sharp and familiar, the same I had carried since childhood when my victories were always called cute while Cyrus's were celebrated. I thought the uniform would shield me from that kind of dismissal. I thought service, sacrifice, and blood would finally make me worthy. But in that moment, standing under the bright lights with applause meant for someone else, I realized the truth hadn't changed. My father would always find a way to silence me. When the ceremony ended, people crowded Cyrus, shaking his hand, patting my father on the back. Their smiles and cheers wrapped around them like a celebration while I slipped quietly toward the exit. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each sound reminding me that I was leaving without dignity, without recognition, with nothing but the ache of being invisible. Outside, the cool evening air pressed against my face, but it didn't calm me. It only reminded me how quickly warmth could be taken away. I walked across the base, notes still in my hand, crumpled from my grip, and I thought about how silence had swallowed me whole in front of everyone. The humiliation was sharp, but worse was the understanding that came with it. No matter how much I gave, no matter how far I went, they could erase me in a single moment. And they had. The night of the attack began like any other. I had come back from the ceremony, uniform hanging carefully on the rack like it was made of glass. My room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I sat on the edge of my bed, still replaying my father's words from earlier, the way he had erased me in front of everyone. My notes lay abandoned on the desk, lines I never got to read, words swallowed by his voice. I thought the night couldn't hurt more than that. I was wrong. The crash came so sudden it rattled the window. My door slammed against the wall with a force that made the frame shake. I jumped to my feet, heart thudding, and there he was. Cyrus. Shoulders hunched, eyes bloodshot, the sour stench of whiskey rolling off his breath. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stormed in, words slurring into shouts. You think you can stand there and take what I built? You think you deserve that uniform more than me? His spit flew as he barked the words, his face twisted with rage. I raised a hand, trying to calm him. You need to leave, Cyrus. Now. My voice was steady, but inside my pulse raced like a drum. He laughed, harsh and cruel. You embarrassed the family. You've always been a fraud. Then his fist came fast, cracking against my shoulder and sending me stumbling back into the desk. Pain shot down my arm. My journal fell open on the floor, pages scattering. I tried to push him away, but his size and weight swallowed mine. His knuckles slammed into my ribs, and I heard it before I felt it, a crack, sharp and sickening. My breath rushed out in a gasp, vision blurring at the edges. Through the haze, I caught sight of movement at the door. My father. Harlan Creed. He stood with his arms folded, leaning against the frame as if he were simply watching a show. His eyes locked on us, cold, unblinking. Dad, the word caught in my throat, torn apart by the next blow. Cyrus's knee drove into my side, folding me in half. My legs buckled, sending me crashing to the floor. I tasted iron as blood filled my mouth, dripping down my chin. My body screamed with every strike, but louder than that was the thought burning in my head, he's watching. He sees this. Cyrus grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my face up toward him. Say you're nothing, he roared, his breath hot and bitter against my skin. My eyes flicked to my father, begging silently for help, for anything. But he didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even blink. The silence burned deeper than the bruises spreading across my body. Another punch split across my cheekbone, the world spinning with stars. My body was giving way, limp against the floor, but my mind clawed to stay awake. My hand dragged across the carpet, inch by inch, reaching for the small green radio on the nightstand, the emergency beacon every soldier kept. My ribs protested with each breath, agony screaming through my chest, but I pressed the switch 3 times. Beep. 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 The faint signal shot out into the night. Cyrus didn't notice. He was too busy spitting venom, his voice sharp and cruel. Nobody will believe you. Not the army. Not your friends. Not even your father. His words sank into me like knives, and when I looked up, my father's silence was the confirmation. Then, in the distance, I heard it, the faint wail of sirens rising, closer with each second. Cyrus froze, his eyes darting toward the window. Panic flickered in his face. This isn't over, he hissed, shoving me down hard. My body smacked against the floor, ribs screaming. He spun toward the door, and my father stepped aside. Just like that. No word, no hand raised, nothing but a quiet shift of his weight as he let Cyrus pass. The silence pressed down on me like another assault. My breath came ragged, every inhale scraping against broken ribs. My vision blurred, but I forced my eyes open, forced myself to hold on until the pounding of boots filled the hall. The MPs burst through the door, their voices overlapping, urgent and sharp. Soldier down. Get her stable. Medics now. Hands lifted me, strapped me onto a stretcher. The fluorescent lights of the hallway streaked above me, spinning into lines as they rushed me out. I felt the cold of metal beneath me, the pressure of bandages wrapping tight, voices echoing around me. But through the chaos, one thought stayed clear, sharp, unrelenting. He saw it. He saw everything. And he turned away. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, sharp and clean, the kind of scent that clings to your lungs until it makes you dizzy. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and every time I opened my eyes, the ceiling looked the same, pale, colorless, empty. My arm was strapped in a sling, heavy and stiff, while bandages wrapped around my ribs so tight I could barely breathe without wincing. Each inhale was like fire spreading through my chest. My cheek throbbed where the skin had split, and my mouth still tasted faintly of blood no matter how much water I drank. But the truth is, none of that compared to what I felt inside. The pain in my body was sharp, but the ache in my chest, the betrayal, was heavier than anything the medics could treat. I kept replaying the moment, my father standing in the doorway. I could still see his face, calm, detached, as if he were watching a stranger get torn apart, not his own child. That image clung to me worse than the bruises. Every time I closed my eyes, it was there, burning in the dark. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that shock had twisted the memory, but I knew better. He was there. He saw it. And he chose nothing. A nurse came in, checking the monitors, adjusting the 4. She gave me a small smile, the kind of practiced kindness nurses learn when they know better than to ask questions. You're stable, she said softly. Stable. A word that meant my body wasn't failing, but it didn't touch the chaos boiling inside me. She left an envelope on the tray by my bed before stepping out. Plain, white, no emblem, just my name scrawled across the front in black ink. I stared at it for a long time, afraid to open it, already suspecting what it might hold. When I finally tore it open, my hands shook. The letter was clinical, cold, every line sharp as a blade. Notice of temporary suspension pending psychological evaluation. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Psychological evaluation. Emotional instability. Questionable conduct. They weren't questioning Cyrus. They weren't questioning my father. They were questioning me. I forced my eyes to the bottom of the page, desperate for some detail that might explain. And then I saw it. My father's name. Signed under supporting statements. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. He hadn't just stood by in silence. He had put his name to the lie, made it official, stamped it into the record that I was unstable, unfit, the one who cracked. The paper slipped from my fingers, landing on the sheets like something toxic. I sat frozen, staring at the wall across from me. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Tears would have made their case stronger, would have turned their words into proof. So I just sat there, jaw clenched, ribs aching with every shallow breath, the silence pressing down like a second weight. They weren't just trying to erase my voice. They were rewriting my entire history, piece by piece, until I was nothing but the version they needed me to be. For the first time I understood it fully. The beating, the silence, the suspension, it was all connected. This wasn't just about Cyrus's rage or my father's coldness. This was about control. About silencing me before I could speak the truth out loud. And staring at that letter, my father's signature burned into the bottom, I realized the betrayal wasn't just physical. It was complete. It was late in the evening when my phone lit up on the nightstand. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just another update from the MPs or some automated reminder about medical evaluations. But then I saw the preview of the message, and my stomach twisted. It was from my cousin Marcy, the kind of person who never reached out to me unless it was gossip. She had sent a screenshot of a family group chat I hadn't been part of in years. Before I could even react, the message was retracted, as if she regretted sending it, but the preview had already burned itself into my mind. I opened the screenshot slowly, my hands heavy, almost unwilling. The thread was short, but every word sliced deep. She always had a flair for drama, one line read. Another, maybe she hit herself. Wouldn't be the first time she exaggerated. My chest tightened as I scrolled further. She's unstable, just like her mother was. I could almost hear the smug voices behind those words, the same ones that had whispered doubts about me my entire life. But the final blow wasn't the words themselves, it was the reaction beneath them. A single thumbs up emoji. From my father. I stared at it until the screen blurred, my vision swimming. A thumbs up. Not even a sentence, not even an explanation. Just a careless symbol, casual and final. It told me everything I had feared for years. He didn't just doubt me. He never believed me at all. He never even tried. My hand shook as I hovered over his name in my contacts. Against every instinct, against every memory of his silence, I pressed the call button. 1 ring. My chest ached. 2 rings. My throat tightened. On the third, before it could connect, I hung up. What was I even hoping for? An explanation? An excuse? Maybe even a cowardly denial? Whatever part of me had still clung to the idea that he might one day protect me, defend me, or at least hear me, it died in that second. The room felt colder, heavier. I sat there, phone still glowing in my hand, and realized I had reached the end of hope. The last thread tying me to the idea of paternal protection, of a father who might still care, snapped and vanished. The beating had broken my body. The suspension letter had threatened my career. But this, the confirmation that even my family mocked me, that my father joined in, this broke something deeper. I lay back slowly, trying to breathe evenly, ignoring the sharp ache in my ribs. It wasn't just pain keeping me awake anymore. It was the truth settling in fully. I had no shield, no ally, no safe corner to run to. I was on my own. And if I was going to survive this, if I was going to stop them from erasing me completely, I would have to fight without expecting anyone to stand beside me. It was the kind of night where silence pressed too heavy on the walls, the hospital lamp buzzing faintly like it was the only thing alive in the room. I was sitting on the edge of my bed when the knock came at the door. Not a nurse this time. A young soldier stood there, barely 20, awkward in his too big uniform, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. I recognized him from training runs, the polite one who always said ma'am even when I asked him not to. He didn't step inside. He just looked around, then slipped a small flash drive onto the tray beside me. His jaw was tight, eyes darting toward the hallway. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered. And before I could respond, he was gone. I stared at the flash drive, my heart thudding. For a long moment, I didn't move. My ribs ached when I bent forward, but I plugged it into my tablet anyway, the screen glowing back at me. At first, it was just static, gritty, uneven noise. Then voices broke through. Cyrus's voice, sharp and full of venom, spitting anger I knew too well. "You don't get to wear that uniform like it means something." My chest clenched at the sound. Then another voice joined. Calm, certain, colder than ice. "My father. Just finish this. She needs to be put in her place." I froze. My father's voice hit me harder than any punch ever could. There was no denial left, no excuses, no room to pretend his silence had been weakness or fear. It was a choice. He hadn't just stood by. He had ordered it. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the tablet. The recording was short, only fragments mixed with static, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what I already knew but still hadn't dared to fully accept. It wasn't just Cyrus's rage I had been fighting. It was my father's will. The heartbreak was sharp, but under it, something else began to rise. A shift, steady and certain. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This wasn't about begging for recognition or hoping someone would finally believe me. This was war. Not the kind fought with rifles or sandbags, but with truth, with records, with proof that couldn't be twisted by family names or silenced by signatures. That night, I pulled my journals closer, flipping through the pages filled with years of deployments, injuries, forgotten details I had written down only to keep my mind steady. Every line now felt like evidence. Every note was a thread in a bigger picture they couldn't control. I searched my files, my old emails, even backup drives I hadn't touched in years. I found suppressed reports, commendations stripped of my name, altered field notes where my role had been erased. One by one, I cataloged them. I backed everything up, copying the recording in 3 places, encrypting it so it couldn't vanish if my tablet disappeared. The paranoia that had once felt heavy now felt necessary. They had tried to erase me since childhood, twisting every victory into dust. Not this time. As the night stretched on, I felt the ache in my body fight against the surge of determination in my chest. My ribs protested with each movement, but I kept going, typing, saving, stacking proof like weapons. They thought they could silence me forever. But now I had their voices, their signatures, their lies caught in ink and tape. For the first time since the night Cyrus crashed through my door, I didn't feel broken. I felt dangerous. The news clip came out of nowhere. I had just returned from a medical appointment, still in uniform, sling tight against my ribs, when the television in the corner of the waiting room caught my attention. The anchor's voice was steady, professional, sliding right into a segment about serious accusations threatening the careers of decorated military personnel. Then his face appeared. Cyrus. Sitting in a studio chair, not in uniform this time but in a crisp button-down, the blue curtain behind him swaying slightly from the air vents. He looked calm, polished, almost trustworthy, exactly how he wanted to be seen. I won't speculate, he said smoothly, his voice steady as though it had been rehearsed 100 times. But it's dangerous when personal vendettas bleed into official records. Those kinds of false accusations can ruin the reputation of real soldiers who've sacrificed everything. The host nodded, full of sympathetic energy, his flag pin catching the light. There are always 2 sides, Sergeant Thorne. Cyrus leaned forward just enough to look sincere. There are. But the louder side isn't always the honest one. I sat frozen, every word slicing deeper than the bruises still healing under my uniform. He didn't say my name, of course, he didn't need to. Everyone watching knew who he was talking about. Unstable. Emotional. Vindictive. He painted the picture without ever using the words. It was a performance, crafted perfectly to ignite every rumor, every whisper that had ever been used against me. And it worked. The host smiled, the interview ended, and the audience was left with a clear story. Cyrus was the victim, and I was the problem. My hand tightened around the edge of the chair until my knuckles turned white. My body trembled, not from fear, but from the fury building beneath my skin. I wanted to scream, to march into that studio and tell the truth until the walls shook. But I didn't. I sat in silence, my jaw locked, my eyes unblinking on the screen. I realized then that this wasn't about fists anymore. He wasn't coming at me with brute force. He was coming at me with image, with reputation, with lies polished into something the public could swallow. And I knew something else too. This fight would not be won in a barracks room or a courtroom alone. It would be fought in the shadows of perception, in the places where silence used to kill me. Now it was image against image. And mine, finally, was ready to strike back. I didn't fight back in public, not yet. Instead, I turned to the quiet places, the spaces where truth could survive without being strangled. I started reaching out to the women I'd met over the years, fellow medics, intelligence officers, even spouses who had seen too much but never been believed. Some were retired, some still serving, some just shadows in old deployment rosters I hadn't looked at in years. I contacted them one by one, carefully, always encrypted, always with caution. And when they realized I wasn't asking for gossip but for truth, the stories began to flow. Each one was different, yet painfully familiar. Assault swept under the rug. Complaints transferred or lost. Promotions mysteriously blocked. Reports rewritten to protect the right name. It was a language of silence, one we all knew by heart. They sent me fragments, dates, memos, medical notes, journal entries. Small pieces that, on their own, could be dismissed. But when laid side by side, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. A pattern of intimidation, erasure, and survival. I didn't put my story at the front. I built theirs first, a file that grew thicker each night as I typed, sanitized, and stripped away names just enough to protect them while leaving the truth intact. Assault. Intimidation. Gaslighting. Always the same story in different uniforms. And then, at the very end, I added my own piece. Clean, precise, no adjectives, no pleas for pity. Just time, place, action. Evidence, not emotion. When the file was long enough, when it looked less like individual voices and more like a chorus, I sent it to a reporter I trusted. A watchdog who had once spoken quietly to me after a press briefing overseas. I didn't sign my name. The message was simple: read this. Then decide. Her reply came an hour later. This is bigger than you think. The next morning, the file appeared on a small watchdog site, buried deep enough not to be obvious, but placed just right for those who knew where to look. It didn't explode. It didn't go viral. But it started a tremor. 2 more women added their stories in the comments. Then 5. Then one post got shared into a private forum for female veterans. The silence that had smothered us for years was breaking, even if only by inches. I sat at my desk that night, ribs still aching, the glow of my tablet flickering across my face, and for the first time I didn't feel invisible. People didn't all believe me, not yet. But not everyone believed him anymore either. And that was enough. I whispered it to myself, steady and certain, I won't be erased. The courthouse smelled of dust and old wood, a place where echoes seemed to live longer than voices. Reporters lingered outside, their cameras waiting like vultures, but inside the courtroom, everything was hushed, heavy, deliberate. I sat straight-backed at the plaintiff's table, sling still pulling against my arm, ribs aching beneath the fabric of my suit. The folder in front of me was thick: medical scans, photographs, audio files, reports scrubbed and rewritten, then restored. Proof carved out of pain. Proof they could not erase. The prosecutors went first. They laid it all out, the medical records from the base that claimed my ribs were fractured days before the attack, then the civilian clinic scan timestamped less than 48 hours after. Fresh injuries, undeniable. Then came the charred remains of my keepsake box, pulled from the maintenance trash bins, my mother's letters reduced to ash. Photos of the burn marks were shown to the jury, the ink of her handwriting half melted into black. The room went quiet as the evidence piled higher, silence broken only by the shuffle of papers and the hum of the air conditioning. When they played the audio from the flash drive, the silence deepened. Static, then Cyrus's voice spitting venom. And finally, my father's calm, commanding tone: just finish this. She needs to be put in her place. It was only a handful of words, but they landed like a hammer. Some jurors flinched. Others glanced toward the defense table where my father sat, jaw locked, eyes lowered. He didn't look at me. Not once. When it was my turn to testify, the walk to the stand felt longer than any march I'd done in uniform. The bailiff swore me in, and then I faced the questions. Some were simple: what happened that night, what injuries I sustained, what I remembered. I answered evenly, clinical, letting my words stay as steady as my reports had always been. No emotion. Just fact. Then came the question that cut deeper than all the others. Can you confirm the identity of the man standing in the doorway during the attack? Yes, I said clearly. My voice didn't shake. I looked straight at the jury, not at him. But I no longer call him mine. The air shifted in the room. A ripple moved through the benches, a quiet intake of breath, as if even the walls needed a second to absorb what had been spoken. My father didn't move. He stayed still, like stone, but for the first time, his silence wasn't power. It was shame. Before the closing arguments, the prosecutor handed me something small, something I had insisted on bringing. A metal. The one that had been stolen, erased, replaced. The engraving scratched out, then carefully re-etched in words, reforged, not replaced. I wore it not for the campus, not for the court, but for the girl I used to be, the one who thought obedience would earn love, the one who thought silence meant safety. I held it up for the jury to see. Some things break, I said quietly. Others, we reforge. That's who I am. The verdict came after hours that felt like years. Cyrus, guilty on all counts. Aggravated assault. Conspiracy. Falsification of military records. 15 years, no parole recommendation. His rank stripped, his medals rescinded, his name erased from the Hall of Commendations. My father sat motionless as the sentence was read, no protests, no objections, just lowered eyes like he was at a funeral he couldn't admit was his own. I didn't watch them being let out in cuffs. I didn't need to. The weight lifted wasn't in seeing them fall, it was in finally being heard. When the gavel struck, the courtroom's heavy air cracked open, and for the first time in months, I felt steady ground beneath my feet. Outside, the reporters swarmed, their microphones stretching toward me, voices overlapping with questions. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked past them, metal against my chest, not for show but for memory. The war I had fought wasn't won with fists or bullets. It was won here, with truth. And the silence that once nearly destroyed me now belonged to me. After the verdict, there was no celebration. No balloons, no victory speeches, no congratulatory crowds. Just the echo of dress shoes on tile as reporters packed up their gear, and the courtroom emptied one row at a time. I walked out alone, the metal tucked close to my chest, feeling not triumph but something quieter, heavier, clarity. Justice had been served, yes, but justice didn't erase the bruises, the silence, or the years of being unseen. Justice didn't give me my father back. It didn't heal the girl who had begged for his approval. What it did give me was ground, steady, solid ground to finally start healing on. The days that followed felt strange. I woke up in a bed that was finally my own, no bunk overhead, no alarm dictating when to eat or move, no orders snapping me into someone else's rhythm. The mornings were silent except for the hum of a ceiling fan and the smell of coffee drifting through linen curtains. At first, the quiet felt empty, almost unbearable, but slowly, it began to feel like something sacred. A silence I controlled. I started volunteering at the local Veterans Center, at first just helping with intake forms and supply runs. It didn't take long before someone asked me to sit in on peer support sessions. I listened more than I spoke. But when I did speak, about silence, about betrayal, about survival, I noticed people leaned in. Not because my story was unique, but because I wasn't afraid to tell it anymore. Eventually, I began a small group just for women. No ranks, no uniforms, no judgment. Just a circle of chairs, coffee in hand, and one promise, that their voices would not be erased. We called it Bravo Echo, our quiet nod to what it means to be heard. One Tuesday, a young woman pulled me aside after a meeting. She was barely in her 20s, still carrying the stiffness of someone new to the military. My dad said people who speak out ruin families, she whispered. I looked her in the eye and said, no. People who hurt others ruin families. People who speak out stop it from happening again. She didn't cry, but she nodded, and the next week she brought a friend. Small ripples, but real. Not long after, while unpacking the last box of my mother's belongings, I found an envelope. My name was written across it in her handwriting, tight and slanted. I sat down on the floor, hands shaking as I opened it. The letter was short. If you're reading this, it means your father never changed. But you must speak when I couldn't. Your voice is your inheritance. I read it 3 times, tears finally spilling, not from pain but from release. It felt like a knot that had been tied for decades had finally loosened. I didn't share that letter with anyone. I kept it folded neatly in the drawer beside my bed, not as evidence, not as proof, but as a reminder. My inheritance wasn't medals or recognition or even love, it was the responsibility to break the silence my mother had carried. Life didn't turn perfect. Healing was slow, uneven, and there were still nights where memories clawed back into the dark. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting to be heard. I was using my voice for something bigger than myself. Each story I listened to, each woman I helped stand a little taller, was proof that pain can be reforged into purpose. The war inside me had ended, not with revenge, but with clarity. And as I stood at the edge of a Memorial Day parade months later, watching a young boy salute crookedly before his mother fixed his hand, I bent down and whispered, like this. He looked up at me and asked, "Are you a soldier?" I smiled faintly. Once. But I still remember how to stand. And that's what healing became, not erasing the past, not pretending the scars weren't there, but standing. Standing in the truth, in the inheritance of a voice that would not go quiet again. I don't wear the uniform anymore. These days, I walk in civilian clothes, simple, unremarkable, but beneath the fabric, close to my heart, I keep the metal. Not where anyone else can see it, not for cameras or applause, but for me. Reforged, not replaced. Every time the metal presses lightly against my chest, I remember what it cost and what it gave back. The silence that once broke me is the same silence I now carry as a weapon. They used it to erase me. I use it to remember, to sharpen my voice, to remind myself that truth doesn't die just because someone buries it. When I think back to those nights, the hospital rooms, the courtroom, the ash of my mother's letters in my hands, it no longer feels like the end of me. It feels like the beginning. Pain turned into purpose. Betrayal turned into clarity. My voice, once ignored, mocked, silenced, is now mine, and I refuse to let anyone take it again. But I want to ask you something, directly. Have you ever been silenced by your own family? Have you ever carried the weight of knowing the very people who should have protected you were the ones who erased you? What would you have done in my place, standing in that doorway with blood in your mouth, watching the person you called father turn his back? These are not just my scars. They are the marks of anyone who has been made invisible, anyone who has had their truth rewritten to protect someone else's comfort. And the only way to break that cycle is to speak, to keep speaking, to refuse to be erased. If my story touched you, if it made you remember your own silence, I want you to join me. Leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your story, even if it's just one sentence. Because your voice matters. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, then share this video. Let others see it. Let others feel it. And if you want to hear more, stories that might echo your own in ways you never expected, make sure to subscribe. Because silence ends when voices gather, and maybe the next story will speak directly to you.